What's up, Earth's mightiest subscribers? It's Ernie, Blerd without fear, and this right here is a little different from how I start off videos. All of this month, all of June, and honestly, maybe even for the foreseeable future, depending on how things go, I am raising money for the Bail Project. To address the elephant in the room and tell you what the Bail Project is all in the same breath, we all know about the protests that are going on, and we all know that very many people are being hurt, some even killed, and a lot have been wrongfully incarcerated and imprisoned as a result of it. And that is why I am supporting the Bail Project. The Bail Project is an organization that makes sure that people who are wrongfully criminalized in the acts of freedom fighting and resisting against injustice and inequality can have their legal fees paid and ensure that they're not left in prison for doing what is right, fighting for freedom. Because at the end of the day, freedom isn't always free. And there's a lot of people fighting on the front lines and even more of us who are not. And those who are not, and I count myself among them, in order to do something, I plan on supporting those people who are fighting for me. In the description below and in a pinned comment, you will find a link to my Tiltify campaign to support the Bail Project. And to spice up the pot, I have put rewards and incentives. Things like you being able to pick what my next character breakdown is. Things like picking what story arc I cover next, or even picking a major crossover event for me to cover. All I ask is that you give what you can, and if you can't donate, that's fine. If you can't donate, all I ask is that you share this campaign with other people, and hopefully between our efforts, the efforts of the Bail Project, and the efforts of those out there fighting for freedom, we will eventually be able to end inequality. Now let's get on to the video. What is up, Earth's mightiest subscribers? It's Ernie, Blerd without fear. Welcome back to the channel. Okay, so today's video, we're gonna be talking about a character who I feel like doesn't ever get talked about ever in the history of ever when it comes to talking about black comic book characters. She always gets left in the cold. I rarely, if ever, hear anyone ever say her name in any comic book circles when people talk about amazing black characters in comics. It just doesn't happen. I think in my entire life, I have only met two people, and none of which were face to face, who actually knew about the character of Martha Washington.
Save Martha!
No, not that Martha. That's right, we're gonna be talking about Martha Washington. We're gonna talk about her, we're gonna break this character down, and all that good stuff right now. But first, wash your damn hands, and let's hit that intro.
Word to wise, grass only greener when it's fertilized. Gave them truth in these songs, they prefer to lies. Destiny beautiful, adrift in her purple lies. You can't see me, you Stevie, wondering how I reach more evolutions than Evie, and make it look easy.
Before we get started, if you want to see more awesome comic book videos like this one, it only takes 2 clicks to become one of Earth's mightiest subscribers. Click.
Martha Washington first appeared in Give Me Liberty #1 in 1990 and was oddly enough created by Frank Miller and Dave Gibbons. The character of Martha Washington started off as a poor child who grew up in Cabrini Green of Chicago. That's right, the actual real life Cabrini Green, only in this case a more fictionalized version of the real life locale, but probably no less dangerous. She lived a typical poor kid's life, albeit in this weird, new dystopic version of the United States of America. And her life ran as about one would expect until one day she had a run-in with a drug lord which turned fatal for the would-be pusher man, and wound up getting her caught up with the law, eventually being thrown into a psychiatric hospital. She later learned that there were kids that were having their minds tampered with by the hospital staff, basically being turned into computers. Before anything could be done about it though, the hospital was closed down because of a lack of funding, and she was left homeless with nowhere to turn. This ultimately led to her joining the military, what is known as the PAX, Peace Force, in the Give Me Liberty comic. She believed in fighting the good fight, fighting for good causes, protecting the planet, and as such, she became a war hero and a symbol for liberty in her own right. Now, Martha has no superhuman powers to speak of. She is just a regular, degular, schmegular human being, albeit one with some serious skills that she's acquired over the course of her life, and others she's always had a natural gift for. You see, while in the Peace Force, she learned combat skills that made her a force to be reckoned with on the battlefield. Not just with melee weapons and firearms, but also in hand-to-hand combat as well. Martha Washington rarely, if ever, lost a fight. Even before joining the Peace Force, she was already a skilled computer programmer when she was just a child. This eventually led to her developing those natural talents into becoming a very skilled computer hacker as well, also while she was still a child. Martha was born on March 11th, 1995, and didn't die until exactly 100 years later on her birthday on March 11th of 2095. She has incredibly unbreakable willpower. She's seen the absolute worst of humanity and has somehow come out the other side of it. And when I say that she has seen the absolute worst, she lives in a world, a version of, our world, which pretty much gave into RoboCop politics. The world that she lives in has literally been torn apart by various factions. The United States of America is not the United States of America as we know it. It's a version of the United States that honestly is probably more realistically possible now than it was in the 90s when this comic was actually written. The United States has been divided by all of these different factions that honestly sound cartoonish by 90s standards. If you were reading this in the 90s, you probably sat here thinking that, yeah, there's no way anything like this could ever happen. But honestly, in today's society, it doesn't really seem that far-fetched. And of course, Nazis are still around too, so yes, she has seen pretty much every bad thing you could possibly imagine, and she never allows herself to be beaten or broken. And when she cries, you better be concerned, because she's not sad, she's pissed the f*** off. An odd little side note about her childhood, her favorite toy as a child was a Raggedy Ann doll, something that actually kind of comes into play later on throughout the comic's history. She was instrumental in getting the fictionalized version of Cabrini Green torn down after speaking with then President Nixon and telling him of how she grew up there and that it wasn't a low-income housing facility for poor people, but a brutal prison community. And throughout her many different series and one-shots, a second American Civil War has taken place where she has fought in multiple battles throughout it. Unfortunately, during the same war, Chicago was wiped off the map by a nuclear strike, one that took the lives of both her mother and her brother. We learn later in the series that sometime after the Martha Washington Saves the World one-shot, Martha married Wasserstein, her longtime on-again, off-again romantic partner, and together they had 3 sons. Sadly, she outlived all 3 of them. During that same series, she fought against aliens and even traveled through space to continue her freedom fighting and trying to create a better world for the human race. Speaking of one-shots, during the Happy Birthday Martha Washington one-shot, we learn that she met her childhood hero, Captain Kurtz, an analog for Captain America and Superman. He gave her a dose of his blood to give to the Peace Force to continue the legacy of super soldiers, which he was. And he even implied she should take it herself, but she chose instead to follow his example of no longer following orders, and destroys the blood sample. This was done mostly because the military hid who Captain Kurtz really was, and that it wasn't the government who made the serum, but Captain Kurtz himself. Basically driving a narrative to trick the American people into believing that the government was making super soldiers, not just some regular doctor guy who just so happened to get lucky with the formula. In a way to kind of build reliance on the government. And even Captain Kurtz himself realized that the government doesn't always need to be trusted. And this made her realize that the Peace Force was shady AF. Well, more shady than she already knew. She's also met the big guy from the series The Big Guy and Rusty the Boy Robot during the Martha Washington Stranded in Space one-shot. That may not seem like a big deal to a lot of comics readers, but you kind of have to think about the fact that this is also another long-running Dark Horse comic series, so it was actually kind of a big deal at the time. She's also had a very interesting enemy mine style moment with an enemy soldier of the First Sex Confederacy, an all-female supremacist faction. After both their power armors, firearms, and sidearms all mysteriously malfunction and are destroyed, they both realized it was a sign and just stopped fighting each other. They refuse to talk about politics with each other, but they do laugh at each other's jokes, share war stories, even share food, and decide to wait to see whose backup shows up first, even taking bets on it. Martha Washington rises up through the ranks of the military, from sergeant to lieutenant to eventually just leading the whole damn military. Like, that's kind of a big deal. Like, she literally becomes the John Connor of her universe. Like, she becomes the beacon of hope that people surround because she is the light and the last beacon of hope in a world that it clearly has none. Martha Washington's final words were, "Give me liberty," the name of her original comic series. She also exploded into a cacophony of fireworks too, which is neither here nor there. Upon her death, she does seem to have been replaced by a younger woman who looks eerily like her, minus a scar on her face. Some believe it to be her granddaughter or a clone or a robot, but either way, it doesn't matter. She seems to take leadership of the military and leads her people against an unknown enemy in the closing moments of the Martha Washington Dies one-shot. Martha Washington wore many looks throughout her comics history, from flat tops and shaved head looks inspired by Grace Jones, and even some Space Marine and Space Knight style get-ups. Now, normally when I do videos like these, I typically like to pick an actor or actress who I think would be best suited to play this character on the big or small screen, whatever the case may have you. And in this case, there was no real thing to think about here. This was an automatic for me, and I'm gonna go ahead and say right now, the person I picked, if I could choose for Martha Washington, would be Lupita Nyong'o. That's right, the actress from 12 Years a Slave, Black Panther, Us, and various other films. She is a force to be reckoned with. She is a fantastic actress. Everything I've seen her in just about, she has been amazing, and she has shown she has such a range in acting, from what she's shown us in the film Us to what she shows us in the movie Little Monsters. She's shown us so many different facets of her acting ability that there's no way you could convince me she was not born to play this type of character. Martha Washington is strong, she's tough, she is indomitable, and no matter what has happened to her throughout her comics history, she always bounces back and she always saves the day. So yeah, this is who I would want to portray this character on the big or small screen. That said, Martha Washington didn't really fit the same mold as other comic book heroines in the 1990s. She's one of the very few depictions of women in comics written by Frank Miller, of all people, who is an absolute badass without the need to be a ninja or a hooker. That was something that is just a problematic thing about Frank Miller and his writing style. Women in his comics typically have no agency whatsoever unless they are one of those two things, and Martha Washington was the opposite of that. She overcame everything, and she was probably one of the lesser sexualized female characters of the 90s. I mean, yeah, granted, short of a couple of scenes in Martha Washington Goes to War and the Give Me Liberty series depicting her naked, it's one of the only times in the character's history where she's sexualized, and in these particular cases, it actually services the plot. So yeah, it's one of those situations where, yeah, I feel like she was a character who just kind of rose above the normal humdrum, bog standard black superheroes and comic book characters that we were used to seeing in the 90s. Could she summon lightning storms like, Storm from the X-Men? No, but she did so much with so little. And honestly, she doesn't get enough credit for everything that she's done. But that said, you let me know what you think about Martha Washington. Did you know who she was before this video, or are you just finding out about her now? Let me know. But first, wash your damn hands and sound off in the comments. So hey, you made it to the end of the video. Awesome for you. If you enjoyed this video, and if you made it this far, I don't see how you didn't, do me a favor. Hulk smash that like button. And if you want to see more awesome videos like this one, make sure you click subscribe so you can become one of Earth's mightiest subscribers, and tap that bell so you know when I post up. Also, feel free to go check out my Patreon, where if you chuck in a buck, you can get early access to most of my videos up to a week early. And if you have time, make sure you swing by nerd901.com, where you can find more of my content as well as other amazing stuff. Anyways, until next time, I love you 3000 plus ultra!